Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to another episode of my show, William Wallace for America. As you guys know, I went to CPAC a couple weeks ago, actually about a week and a half ago, met some really interesting people. And as I like to emphasize, a lot of people think that it's just a bunch of Republicans getting together, but really was more about conservative values, not just Republican values. And I always tell people that conservative values know no party line. And the reason for that is because when you meet the people that have the different organizations that are there, you really begin to find people that you have things in common with you never realized. Maybe some of my Democrat friends, when they've seen some of my interviews, they go, wow, wait a minute, I really liked that organization. I like that person, because they don't realize how much they have in common with the average American who goes to these types of conventions and really just does things to help promote American values and things about our country that we can all unite on. And one of those people that I'm bringing on today is Christopher Sevier. Did I say that the right way?
Yeah.
Is it Sevier?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And your organization is Special Forces of Liberty.
That's right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, Christopher, thank you so much for spending some time with me this evening. You know, I try to do my shows in the late afternoon because this is when everybody's on Facebook and YouTube and watching the shows.
Yeah.
But so where are you out of?
So we're kind of wherever we need to be, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. So, we're going to file a lawsuit against the Biden administration by, I think, Monday. We're going to sue Biden as well as Senator Merkel from Oregon, a couple of state reps, Nancy Pelosi will sue Chuck Schumer, the Senate chairman of Judiciary, to basically derail the Equality Act. So that will be in federal district court in D.C. So some of next week I might be in D.C. And then, the week after that I might be just wherever the mission takes us, if you will.
Well, we're going to take that. You just gave us some good meat. So we'll get some good red meat. We'll go back to that in a minute. Yep. Because I also saw that you did some work in Louisiana, in our Louisiana legislature.
Oh yeah, I've done a lot of things in Louisiana. Started in Louisiana working with Michael from the Citizens, Against Taxes, if you will.
Michael Lunsford.
Oh, Michael Lunsford.
He's been on my show before. I didn't know this. All right.
Yeah. We're bros, if you will. And I first came in contact with him because he reached out to us saying, hey, look, there's this drag queen story time thing going down in the Lafayette public.
While you're talking, I'm texting Michael Lunsford.
Oh, good. Yeah. And so he called us and said, look, could you help us out with this? And we looked into it and said, you know what, we're gonna move on that. So we sued the public library in Lafayette to stop them from having drag queen story time. So that's what kind of introduced me to Louisiana, if you will. And
we talked about that. We talked about that lawsuit when I interviewed him on my show a few months ago. He talked about that situation.
Mm-hmm.
So what did you do before your Special Forces of Liberty?
So I went to Vanderbilt undergrad, Vanderbilt Law School. I joined the United States military, trained to be an infantry combat officer, but they made me a judge advocate general. And they attached me with infantry line units. And I was mainly focusing on what's called the rule of law mission, which is the mission that basically gets other countries to obey their constitution. And so, after doing that mission overseas, coming back to the United States and looking at our government, especially under Obama.
So wait, you were in a branch. What branch of the government were you in?
I was in the Army.
And so there's a branch there to make sure other countries are following their constitution.
Yeah, there's a one slot. I'm a first lieutenant, but I was working in what's called an 06 slot on this one mission, a full bird colonel, to work on the mission to help other countries obey their constitutions. It's called the rule of law mission. We're there to strengthen their law, if you will. For example, let's say there's an Iraqi judge that's trying a Al-Qaeda member, and the judge's family's under attack, and he's trying to figure out what he should do and how he should do it. So we'd meet with him to make sure the rule of law gets followed, but also that there wouldn't be reprisals and so forth. And so that was that mission. And so we just carried that over here to the United States to, we file federal lawsuits, and from the litigation, we try to make sure that the state and federal government actors are obeying the United States Constitution or federal law, controlling law. So
I find it ironic that we have, our military commanded by, DC. Not DC politicians. I want to say DC politicians, but we know it's not DC politicians. But still, in all, we know that a lot of things that happen in the military, get dictated, if you will, by DC politicians. And I won't go into all the vaccine requirements that are happening in the military, which I think comes out of DC politicians. But that's a whole other story. But here you are in the military going to other countries, make sure they follow their constitution, when oftentimes our own politicians do not follow our own constitution.
That's right.
Do we need to have other militaries come to our country to make us follow our constitution, or can our own military just do that?
Yeah. Well, I would hopefully guys like me can help us do that. We can use our skill sets to serve as a check and balance on different government actors to ensure constitutional compliance. But it's not easy. I mean, I'll be in a blue state and the legislature is there. We'll make an airtight case, a watertight case for why, if they don't do what we ask them to do, they'll be in direct violation of the Constitution. And a lot of times they listen to all the arguments and they go, oh, wow, that's really good, but we're just going to break the law anyway. And so, then you have to weaponize different forms of checks and balances, like using the federal courts, for example.
So you're not just...
Yeah,
and I'm going to go back to, because I want to keep going back to tell the story of how you started and where the motivation was. But I will kind of circle back every so often. Okay. So it sounds to me like you're not just an activist group that has an agenda to get certain types of laws passed. You're actually a group that says, hey, look, we're going to use some of these things that are going on, but show how you're not following the Constitution by trying to get these laws through.
Right. So full disclosure, I'm a Christian, and that's what forms my worldview. However, when I file lawsuits and do on the culture war topics, that's what we're fighting. All the controversial culture war stuff, pornography online. What do we do about strip clubs? What do we do about social media censorship? I've worked with Louisiana on that. What do we do about, LGBTQ issues? What do we do about critical race theory? What do we do about prayer in schools? And we don't know the answers. And we file these federal lawsuits to figure out what the Constitution of the United States requires. Okay, so a lot of times what the answer, it gives something to the right and it gives something to the left. And so I always say, if I can have both parties mad at me, then I'm probably like where I'm supposed to be. And that's, we try to be neutral and we try to be like soldiers, just really locked up to figure out what, despite our emotions, law is reason without passion. What is the answer? What does the Constitution, the federal Constitution or the state Constitution, what does the law require to be done on the different topics? And then we figure that out and we put it to paper in form of proposed legislation that we take to all 50 states.
So wouldn't a strip club be like a First Amendment right?
Well, we would say this.
I understand the Christian view is, and sometimes, forgive the expression of devil's advocate, sometimes I ask questions in just a way because I try to, I'm a freedom liberty guy.
Sure, man.
So, I'm a Christian, but I'm also a freedom liberty guy. And I have a very unique perspective we'll have to talk about some of the time, but I'll kind of give you a brief description right now. I'm the guy that says, the Bible gives us freedom and liberties. It says, okay, and freedom is mentioned all through the Bible. So being a freedom liberty guy, I support just raw freedom in our country because I believe our Constitution protects our freedoms. It protects our God-given rights. I mean, I firmly believe that our rights are endowed by our Creator, and our Constitution protects those. And sometimes I don't agree with some people's freedoms. I mean, I just say there's just some freedoms I just don't agree with. I'm not a pro-choice person. I'm a pro-life person. But also being a freedom liberty guy, I don't make my fight to take away somebody's legal right to have an abortion. I don't agree with it, but what I try to do instead, and this is just my platform, is I'll find things that we can unite on and bring more people together on. And what I find that happens to be is adoption. So I always say, okay, I'm not going to fight the end of the law to take away a woman's right to choose, because that's almost sounds hypocritical if I'm going to talk about freedom and liberty. But I will promote adoption day and night and as heavily as I can, because I believe it saves babies' lives. I believe that really saves more babies right now, because everybody's fighting over the law, but babies are still dying. So if we find what we can unite on, we get more things taken care of in the meantime, until the day comes when a bigger enlightenment comes, if you will. So that's kind of gives you an example where I am on freedom of liberty. So when you brought up strip clubs, I went, well, that's kind of unique. Like I would agree wholeheartedly about when Michael Lunsford told me about how they were trying to have the drag queens teaching, in the library. That to me is an infringement on, just human rights. I mean, I think it's, you're not taking away somebody's right by saying they can't be there. Instead, you're protecting, I think, other people's rights because of the subject matter, however, and I'm just devil's advocate here. The strip club, it makes me curious, because if it's a private business and somebody has that legal right, and wouldn't it be like a First Amendment right for somebody to do that?
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a background real quick on freedom and truth and so forth.
Yeah,
The thing is on each of the topics.
This is why I asked this, because I love getting good, unique information.
Sure. I mean, so on each of the topics, there's different answers. There's no, and again, some of them kind of give something to the left, and some of them kind of give something to the right. So that's the way it kind of falls together. So basically, it's a form of like a foundation. I would say that without truth, there is no freedom. That freedom comes from the truth, and freedom is not simplistic. Okay, freedom is not the presence of restrictions or the absence of restrictions. Freedom is the presence of the right set of restrictions, the set of restrictions that fit the givenness of our nature, that reflect the way things are and the way we are. Take a fish on the grass. If there's a fish on the grass, is it free? No. It's only free if it's confined to the water, where it can swim lightning fast and even breathe. And so what we're doing with all the bills that we have, they reflect that right balance of restriction and non-restriction in order to enable the most amount of human flourishing, peace, intimacy, forgiveness, and reconciliation. Again, to elevate human flourishing. So that's our view of that. So it's not, we don't want total restrictions like the Democrats want a lot of times, and we don't want no laws at all, like a lot of the libertarians I deal with as well. There's this in-between balance, and everything is very nuanced. Because if anyone says, let's get rid of all taxes, well, that's kind of overly simplistic. Well, let's tax everything to death. That's also, so there's this nuanced balance. And so there's a lot of guiding principles as to how you make policy decisions to where you really kind of split the baby in a way that will proliferate and maximize freedom, so to speak. So
see, I love this information. So while I could probably, because as you're saying it, I'm kind of thinking in different directions. While I or anybody could go in that what you just now said and pick apart that information and say, well, what about this and what about that, and everything. But I just love the overall general information, the way you said that. So I appreciate that. I really do.
I make that argument in court all the time with judges. Like I'll lay into them with that, with as a foundation. I'll start with that. The importance of truth and how it connects with freedom. So
let's talk about you got out of the military, or you're out of the military now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Did you start this Special Forces of Liberty immediately after you got out of the military?
Well, by the way, I mean, I say I'm out of the military, but you never know. Someone like me could end up in Ukraine very easily.
Right.
And linking up with different groups that are heading over there right now, So, basically when I got it, I was almost killed at one point in the military. And when that happened, I decided, wow, I really want to be a Christian missionary. And so I decided to go on all these overseas Christian mission trips and some pretty wild places, kind of getting my military fix and doing that.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, I had the opportunity to join up with FBI and special forces to do extractions and human trafficking. And so while I was training for that mission, I basically came to terms with the fact that if I really want to fight evil, and I do, the best thing that I can do is file intense federal lawsuits on different topics in order to bring about the result, if you will. So the first thing I did was I sued Apple in federal district court this is in 2013, for basically saying, I want their products to be modified. So in a way, and this goes back to your freedom and restriction thing too.
Right.
So it deals with pornography and prostitution websites. So we sued Apple for products liability, for basically false advertising, for racketeering and obscenity codes and some other things. And basically saying that we want Apple's products to be sold in a way, their laptops and cell phones, to be sold to where when you buy the laptop and cell phone, pornographic websites and websites that are known to facilitate human trafficking are blocked by default. But if you're an adult, you're a consumer, and you want to have access to those websites, fine. You have to show proof of ID. You might have to pay a fee to remove it that will go to the business.
Mm-hmm.
But the business can't create a database, and the internet will be just like it is right now. And that's what we wanted to do, because it's our position that if you block prostitution websites and also X-rated websites, by default, it would cause all kinds of exploitation to plummet. The demand for human trafficking would plummet, because the evidence would suggest that sex trafficking is going from the street corner to the smartphone. And so that is kind of a balance of freedom, kind of argument. Are we trying to legislate morality by completely prohibiting pornography? No, we're not. We are just saying that we do think that those websites that cultivate a lot of secondary harmful effects, especially on children, should just be blocked by default. And instead of making consumers who want to avoid that kind of content have to incur expenses to modify the product to make them safer, instead of putting the burden on them, we're just shifting the burden.
I get it completely. And I'm telling you, where you're going with this is something that I can now see. That you see your point, because I've talked about human trafficking before on my show. I've had another guest or two that have talked about it. And when you find out how invasive human traffic has gotten into so many different areas, and I use the word invasive in that, to your point, where, it's not being invited by many people, on their cell phones, but their phones are already set up where they automatically get it, and they don't realize it. I mean, like, the average person is not going to get, isn't having that show up on their phone unless they're looking for it. But to your point, because human traffic is getting into so many other areas of social media, it's no telling where it may show up. And so, to your point, I see where you're going with that. You can say, hey, this can't be an automatic thing. People have to opt into it. So if you make it something that it has to be opted into, then it doesn't make it as easy for the human traffickers to always have it showing up everywhere.
Yeah, well, I mean, I deal with Johns a lot who've been arrested, and they basically say, look, man, I didn't want to go down that path, but I was just, really stressed and had all these problems, and the one click away and I could order up what I want. But if it's blocked by default and you have to take extra steps to get it, most people won't do that. Same thing. Let's go back to strip clubs, for example. Do we want to prohibit strip clubs? No. But what we want to do is, do we want to zone them away from the neighborhoods, do we want to move them away from the church, we don't want it right across the street from the elementary school, do we? No.
Okay.
We want to zone that, because what that is a filter. It's a barrier. It makes people think harder before they open the door to enter into one of those places, which the Supreme Court has found relentlessly has a lot of secondary harmful effects. And I'll say, by the way, from that first litigation against the Apple with the filters and so forth, we wrote a bill it was called the Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation Prevention Act, but we've changed the name to the Save Our Children Act, and we have the language for that. We're going to ask Representative Valerie Hodges to be the prime sponsor of that.
Oh yeah, she's awesome. She's a good one. She's good. Yeah,
I like her a lot. Yeah,
she's a rock star.
She is. Yeah, and then Senator Beth Mizell, I believe I'll lean on her to take.
Yep, she's awesome too. Yeah.
And then I have there's a couple of things that have Beryl Abedin.
I'm interviewing Beryl on Monday.
Okay, you can ask her about the Fight Exploitation Funding Act. So
okay,
well, she actually carried a version of that social media censorship bill that Senator Jay Morris carried in the Senate. Mm-hmm. But we just decided, let's go with Senator Morris's bill, because there was a pathway forward for him to move his better than Beryl at the time, for just different reasons. So
right,
yeah.
Oh yeah, no, I spent a lot of time in Baton Rouge. The session starts on Monday. If gas wasn't as expensive, I usually go there every day. So I'm just bringing that up. I'll probably only be there 2 or 3 days a week now, but I'll be up there.
Feel free to take the bills that we have for Louisiana to the state house and go around to the members. They would definitely appreciate that.
Yeah, we're going to talk. We're going to talk. After the interview, we're going to talk off camera a little bit.
Sure.
On some of those things, because I want people to get to know you. So
Sure.
you got out of the military. What sparked your interest to be able to start this organization?
Well, again, so I joined the FBI and Special Forces do extractions and human trafficking, and I filed all these lawsuits against the tech companies to regulate them. And from that litigation, the judges in the case kind of pulled me to the side and said, look, what you're doing is great, but we are not the legislative branch. And instead of trying to create policy for the whole nation through us, they're like, why don't you take some of this stuff to the legislature? So what my impression was is the courts have been allowing me to litigate the cases fully, to figure out the answers. A lot of times in the end, they figure out a way to kind of dodge making a final decision,
Right.
which I'm fine with. Because I get it. They're supposed to be the weakest branch. But from that, I clearly come up with a roadmap to where when I write a bill, if it's introduced, like Jay Morris's bill and the social media censorship bill, if it's signed into law and there's a lawsuit, it will survive in court. Because it's not just good enough. You don't just want to write a bill and have it introduced and pass out of the committee and pass out of the House and pass out of both chambers and go to the governor's desk and sign it. You're not done at that point. Then it just gets started. Then if it's a good bill on the cultural war, there's going to be a lawsuit. And so you have to be able to survive in court. And in order to do that, it's got to be framed in a certain way and contain certain things to the bills. And
this has been a lot. This is a lot of work. I mean, this is how long have you been studying this? How long have you been doing this?
Well, I mean, it's also so when the first lawsuit I filed was on the culture war stuff was in 2013. Okay. And that was on human trafficking stuff. But as I'm fighting that, I'm noticing the Obergefell and all the same-sex marriage, LGBTQ stuff coming down the turnpike. And I'm like, no one is going to try to derail that. So we're going to try. So I intervened in about all of those cases. I mean, I was at Obergefell for the Supreme Court hearings, and I think we moved to intervene in a majority of those cases to basically make all these arguments to demonstrate how absurd what was happening, to kind of expose that what Scalia called an egotistic judicial push is truly a threat to American democracy, and it's completely invalid. They were basically weaponizing the 14th Amendment in ways it's never designed to be used, a way that's really pretty offensive, really. And so from that litigation, we then wrote bills on LGBTQ matters. And in terms of balancing freedom and restrictions and so forth, in one sentence, I'll explain the LGBTQ stuff back to the library in Louisiana. Okay. So it would be our position in that case, the Louisiana lawsuit against the Lafayette Public Library, that the self-identified transvestites, the self-identified homosexuals have permission to have drag queen story time at a Starbucks, which is a privately owned place, as long as they don't violate the obscenity codes, which they might, but as long as they don't, they can have it there. But we object to them having drag queen story time at the public library for children in the center of the library because it's taxpayer funded. And just like I'm a Christian, I come from that worldview. I favor that worldview. I buy into those set of truth claims, but I don't want the public library to host Christian Bible study for children either. I want the library to be neutral as to that stuff.
So what you just did, which is pretty interesting, is you tied that decision to taxpayer dollars, making it to where, hey, yeah, I understand the private business, but hey, for taxpayer funded, it shouldn't be allowed. That's the exact same thing that the Supreme Court did a few weeks ago. We had when the OSHA mandate was coming, it was being imposed on workers or businesses of 100 employees or more. Right. We had I don't know if you've heard of the Pelican Institute here. You know them? Yeah. Okay. Hopefully you get along with them.
I have a love-hate relationship with them. They opposed our social media censorship bill. Straight up, they did, which makes no sense, because the fact of the matter is that anyone who knows anything about social media censorship, Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, or the doctrine of preemption, should know that the way that bill is written is the answer to the problem. There's not like several answers and so forth. That's the answer. And I know they're in Louisiana. I know Louisiana is very proud of them, but they're very territorial. And so they did, in fact, just a fact. Are they good guys?
Would not allow OSHA to enforce the vaccine mandate. However, there was another part of the law when it came to the medical aspect of it, where the Supreme Court, kept that mandate in place, and the reason for it was Medicaid tax dollars. So the idea was that they said that the government should be able to have a say in that and those mandates, because there were there were federal medical dollars, however you want to word that gave them the right to impose those mandates because there was federal dollars attached. So now, to your point, you're just using that same thing where in the favor of your organization or conservatives or even just children, it's in favor of protecting people. You say, hey, look, this can't be taught because it's taxpayer funded, so all the taxpayers should have a say. And if you really want to go into the weeds here, the majority of the taxpayers are probably going to be against this anyway.
So what we do with most of the culture war fight, whether it's think about the culture war stuff. What do we have? CRT, right?
Mm-hmm.
Should we be teaching that in schools? LGBTQ issues, you name them. I mean, forcing doctors to do transgender surgeries, drag queen story time at public elementary schools or libraries, boys participating in girls' sports, gay marriage, all those kind of stuff, or abortion even. Take those three topics alone. We, in our cases, are making the argument that the Establishment Clause balanced with the Free Exercise Clause of the First Amendment of the United States Constitution has exclusive jurisdiction over those topics and not the 14th Amendment, as the left has wrongfully framed for decades, really.
Remind people the 14th Amendment.
So the 14th Amendment is part of the United States Constitution that has two real parts. One's called the Equal Protection Clause, and the other one's called the Substantive Due Process Clause. The Equal Protection Clause can be invoked if the matter before the court, let's say, or the matter at issue involves immutability in genetics. Okay, so skin color. Okay, that's immutable in genetics, unless you're Michael Jackson. And then substantive due process means this. It means if there was something that was a part of American tradition and heritage, it's kind of grandfathered in and protected. Okay, mm-hmm. That's what the judges are supposed to interpret it as. However, the liberal judges get together and they come up with this basic scam where they go, no, substantive due process means if there's something that ought to be a right, therefore it is a right. So that's the difference between the originalist judges like Alito, Thomas, those kind of guys, Scalia, mm-hmm. versus the activists who have the living constitutional interpretation. That's how they've been creating all this bad policy, through that kind of loophole, so to speak. And that's why it's important to have Christian, honest originalist judges on the bench and not these liberal activists. But what we've been doing in all these cases is we've been filing lawsuits and we've been framing LGBTQ and abortion and critical race theory as for what they are, their religion. That's what they are. They're not based on medical science. We would actually say that, the mask mandates and the vaccine mandates seem to be based on something beyond medical science as well. It's a little bit harder for those cases. But
you mean maybe like a cult?
No. we definitely call them a cult. That's what we call them in court. I call them the licentious LGBTQ cult is what I call them, or the Black Lives Matter cult, or and that's what we call.
And again, as a freedom liberty guy, I kind of I'm not against vaccines. I'm not against masks. I'm just. What'd you say?
I said, no, it makes sense.
Yeah, I'm just against the mandates.
That's fair.
But there's a fine line there when the narrative pushed by the media, and this isn't just for the vaccines and the mask. This goes with CRT. It could go with LGBTQ interest. But when the narrative that gets pushed by the media becomes so overpowering, they create a group of people that conform to that narrative or abide by that narrative or start believing in that narrative, and they don't see outside of it. They don't see any other information outside of it, and they become so ingrained, if you will, in that narrative that anybody else who tells me anything different, they're the racist, or they're the hater, or they're the conspiracy theorist. And I'm just more of a free thinker. I just say, look, if you want to believe in that, you go for it. You want to do that, but don't force it on me. So where freedom and liberty for me, is maybe a little bit more broader than what you've mentioned earlier. I still don't believe in the imposition of the narrative or the beliefs or the mandates or the laws that forced me to have to believe something that I say is okay for somebody else, but not for me. Does that make sense to you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you start this organization?
So the lawsuit started in 2013. And then the first time, so from the lawsuits I was filing, I was getting the impression the courts are going, take this to the legislative branch. So I met in 2016 with a state representative who was a senator in Alabama named Jack Williams. And I went to him and I go, man, look, I've got all this stuff together, how we can really have some regulations that will protect children from pornography online and reduce the demand for human trafficking. And he goes, man, this is great, but you're going to have to write the bill. I'm like, I have no idea how to do that. He's like, well, you're going to have to figure it out. Yeah. So I started in like 2016 doing it. And basically what happened was, from 2016, we were filing more lawsuits the whole time. And from these different lawsuits we're filing, we sued Mayor Bowser for displaying the Black Lives Matter banner on 16th Street, for example. And from that litigation, we wrote the Stop Woke Act. Or we sued the Attorney General of the United States challenging the constitutionality of Section 230. And from that, we wrote the Social Media Accountable Censorship Act. So really from 2016 until now, we've been doing this pattern. It is the way to create law. Because if you go in a room like Family Research Council, Alliance, well, not Alliance Defending Freedom, but definitely Family Research Council, even the Pelican guys. Not to say that they always do this, but if you just go in a room and from your own imagination come up with a bill idea, it's about guaranteed that if it's going to really do something, it's going to have real enforcement mechanisms, you're going to get sued and you got to be able to survive in court. So what we do is we start in court. We figure out all the landmines at where they are. We figure out how to get around those. We write the bills in a way that if they get signed into law, if the courts try to strike it down, it's going to create such bad precedent that it will create an enormous amount of blowback for them. So they just won't do it. Does it make sense?
No, I understand completely. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what
you're reverse engineering it.
100,000%. I mean, I'm in court. I'm in court right now. I've been working on pleadings all day today and filing things online.
You should have been an attorney.
Say again?
You should have been an attorney.
No, I am an attorney.
Oh, you are an attorney?
Yeah. Well, as a judge advocate general, you got to be a lawyer. Went to Vanderbilt undergrad, Vanderbilt Law School. Yeah.
Okay. All right. I heard you at the Vanderbilt, but I must have missed the Vanderbilt Law School part. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would recommend never filing a lawsuit unless you're a lawyer ever, because it's really complex. I mean, there's my friend Pastor Devin O'Neill from Louisiana, and he files lawsuits because he's a pastor who's willing to fight, and I respect that. But I definitely think, it's really, really complex stuff. So, you have to have the training to be able to do it.
So Special Forces of Liberty. When did you actually get the idea to form that as an official group?
Well, so again, it's not something we ever planned. It's just something that just kind of happened. Yeah.
So, when did it happen?
Well, I mean, I think mainly in 2016. 2017 is when we first started going to the state legislature with different policy ideas.
Okay.
We've written other bills. We have the TRECA bill, that deals with this Time Educational Release Credit Act, which deals with getting prayer back in school in a way that doesn't offend the First Amendment. The reason we know how to write that is because we've been litigating so many First Amendment issues. We know how to do that. Or there's a lot of different bills, or bill to defund Planned Parenthood, for example, not allowing taxpayer dollars to go to Planned Parenthood, the Life Appropriation Act, or the Fight Exploitation Funding Act, which I think, again, Beryl Abedin, I think will carry in Louisiana. I need to check whether and see if she'll do it this session, but it's from 2017.
I think you have a hard time. I think they've already filed all their legislation.
Right. Well, and also I think this year they can file more. Last year they can only file like 2 bills each or something.
Well, yeah, last year was a fiscal session, so they were only able to file like an additional 2 non-fiscal bills, I think it was. Right. But the session starts Monday, and I don't know when their deadline is, but they're already at 1,200 bills for this session. So, I guess I don't know that they've been, if the deadline's passed or not, but we might have to check on that. So let's talk. So you started Special Forces of Liberty as a way to the word liberty in there. I love liberty, and for me it's synonymous with freedom. but you chose liberty for the name. Now, most people would think of liberty, freedom is like what I was explaining a minute ago, with where just everybody has free will, everybody has their rights, everybody do what they want. But you've made a great case for why there should be restraints on certain parts of it. Even though I'm a freedom liberty guy, and I'm saying that for a reason, I
Right.
sort of understand not allowing a cross dresser to go into a public library and teach children about LGBTQ studies.
Right.
Understand that. I actually, even though I'm again freedom liberty, and listening to where the strippers bars should be, I that makes sense. If you're not fighting to take away that freedom and liberty from anybody who likes to participate, you're simply saying, hey, look, it should be at the end of the block instead of on the corner across the street from the school, next to the nursery, and across the street from the hospital.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
you're saying just move it on down the road, and you didn't take away anybody's freedom or liberty. And
Right.
not bringing up that.
We definitely use the law in a way to make the objectively healthy choice the easy choice. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
That goes back to the zoning ordinance. Now, the bill we have for Louisiana that I'm pretty sure, the Democrats like it, the Republicans like it. It's called the Fight Exploitation Funding Act. It's a bill that says if you go to a strip club in Louisiana, you have to pay at least, if you're in New Orleans, you go to a strip club, you got to pay $5 to get in. That $5 is remitted back to the Department of Revenue to go into a special grant fund called the Louisiana Human Trafficking and Child Exploitation Prevention Grant Fund, for the benefit mainly for nonprofit groups within Louisiana that are fighting human trafficking, fighting to uphold community standards of decency, doing anything to promote pro-family, pro-family living, if you will, and recovery and things of this nature. And so what that's going to do is, are we taxing them to death? No, it's a $5 fee. It's nominal. Is it going to the general fund? No, it's not. It's going to a special grant fund to be used to help offset the secondary harmful effects that are naturally created by those establishments. So, and it's got to come from somebody who should have to pay for it. Well, it should be paid for by the people who are substantially contributing to the problem. Plus, it also makes those patrons think, yeah, I'm going to go here, but I'm funding these groups that are fighting what this stuff promotes, if you will.
And you could use this to the benefit of one of the clubs, where you put a sign up that says, we don't believe in human trafficking.
Sure.
A $5 your $5 donation at the door helps us fight human trafficking.
Well, the other thing too is we don't want to punish people for being humans. Humans are naturally sexual beings. Sex is a good thing. God made it. But, it's all about context. And so, again, we don't want to, like when I was in the military, every vice you could think of was illegal. Pornography, sex, drinking, you name it. Okay.
In the military?
Oh, yeah. Everything you could even think that would be bad is illegal. So did sin, if you will, go away? No, it just morphed. And so that's why trying to engage in prohibition, so to speak, on things isn't necessarily the answer. It's always very complex, but you definitely want to discourage people from engaging in activity that goes against the givenness of our nature. And we would simply suggest that humans don't flourish best if they're addicted to pornography, if they're hiring prostitutes, if they're aborting their children, if they're engaging in gay acts, if they're indoctrinating themselves with CRT. So we think that those things are all should be disfavored by government. Some of those things are religious in nature, and the government cannot endorse it. And this is something we argue all the time in court. This might help you out. If I frame something as religion, like BLM or LGBTQ or abortion, which it is, two things are invoked immediately: the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment and the Free Exercise Clause. The Establishment Clause piece would say the government, Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, we don't give a damn who you are. You cannot engage in activity that promotes, respects, endorses, or favors their ideology. Okay, especially in public schools. Okay, because it's entangling the government with religion. Just as if Ted Cruz was president, let's say, he couldn't impose Christianity through the organs of government. We want the government to be neutral so people can make up their own mind as to which church they want to belong to. Okay, now, free exercise clause means this. If you frame something as religion, People have the right under the free exercise clause to believe in it, that ideology, without being discriminated against, and then a lot of times practice it. However, the practices, free exercise clause is not absolute. So here's a key thing. We say this all the time in court. If the religious practice at issue either does two things: if it promotes licentiousness, which abortion does, or LGBTQ certainly does, or number two, if it's an attempt to justify practices that are inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state, the government can completely ban it, regulate it to the teeth in that individual state. Okay. So this is why polygamy is illegal in all 50, just about every state, I think. I'm maybe not in Utah, but the rest of them it is. And so those are the different kind of, those are the different factors at play when you're coming up with regulations. I'll give you another example. So let's say, talk about liberty, right? There's this guy from Vietnam, and he's come from this religious background that says that if your wife does X, Y, and Z, you are duty bound to kill her. Okay. So this guy.
And where is this?
This is I think a case. It's a famous case. I think it's the Ha case, but I'm going to probably name the name wrong. But I definitely remember the principles of the case, which was.
And where was this?
This was so a guy from Vietnam is part of a religion that says if your wife does X, Y, and Z, you must kill her. Okay. So this guy from Vietnam comes over to the United States with his wife, and his wife does X, Y, and Z, and then he kills her. And then at trial, his argument defense is, Your Honor, I come from a religious worldview that if your wife does X, Y, and Z, you have to kill her. I didn't want to kill her, but I was duty bound to kill her.
I was duty bound.
Yeah. Should the judge say, well, liberty to each his own? Like, no, because that's a practice, while though it is religious, is inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state, and therefore the government can completely regulate it. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense. This, one of the things I love about my interviews and bringing on people that sometimes I'll bring on somebody and I don't know what to expect, but sometimes they're the best ones because you get a ton of information. And while like I said earlier, where any of these individual things that you're saying, some of them that can be, like, of course, your story there can't be argued, but some of the things you come out with, anybody can argue bits and pieces of it, but the information that you share out of this is just invaluable.
This is the thing that kills me. Like you said, 1,200 bills have been introduced in Louisiana, right?
1,200.
I guarantee you, these guys. Most of these. Let me say this about lawyers. Okay, lawyers know just enough to be dangerous on any policy topics unless we've litigated it. This is why I'm very hesitant to talk about vaccines and masks and so forth, because I know some principles that would apply, but I haven't litigated it. But I've litigated all the abortion stuff you could ever imagine, or all the LGBTQ stuff for critical race. So we know that very cold. We know that we know it really well. The problem with a lot of if it's a policy that no one cares about, a water bill, they can do whatever they want to do. If it's a budget, they can do it. But the voters care about these culture war topics. And so what a lot of times the legislatures do is they're kind of like someone who's supposed to conduct brain surgery who never went to medical school. So we're coming into.
They might have stayed at a Holiday Inn last night,
basically, and I'm coming to them saying, "Listen, I don't want credit. I don't want glory. I want you to win. Okay, let me guide your hand to do this brain surgery, so the patient, the constituent, doesn't die. And then you have some groups come in and say, "We're going to be territorial and stop you for all these egotistical reasons."
Yeah, we want that CRT. We want that because we believe in it. It's our religion. Right.
Well, a lot of times, the legislatures will go, "No, I'm going to do it anyway." And I'm like, it's just going to get struck down, man. And when you get it struck down, it makes my job harder because then I have to go and clean up what you just did, Well,
what's interesting is a lot of all this legislation that gets created just this session, you got to think about all the years gone by, all these legislators that do legislation on top of legislation. And oftentimes, and I've done interviews on this before, it gets intertwined in such a way where they don't even realize it. Like some bill that was passed 5 years ago, 10 years ago, might conflict with the bill they passed this year in such a way that and they don't even realize it. Now, granted, at the Capitol, there are a lot of really smart people that work outside of the elected offices. I would say that'd be kind of be funny, but I've met the attorney, the attorney that's in charge of all the other attorneys, and his job at the Capitol is to take each individual piece of legislation and research other legislation and make sure that that legislation either will fit into the Constitution or fit into the laws or fit into the procedures and will fit along with the other laws. I said it differently a few ways here for a reason, because I'm not going to say it the exact way he said it, but also saying it several ways gets people to understand, oh, yeah, it doesn't fit in our Constitution or it fits within our set of laws. Either way, even though they have really smart people doing that, on a daily basis, all these laws, a lot of legislation gets passed that still conflicts with other legislation. There's a really, really good state rep. I'll tell you her name off camera that you need to get to know. And she says every year she makes it her mission to find a piece of legislation that conflicts with another piece of legislation, and her legislation is to cancel it out. Like she tries to repeal. She's every session. One of her pieces of legislation is to repeal another piece of legislation, because she says we have too many laws on the books. We're always creating laws. Like there's this race to just go create laws. And I mean, I met a legislator who's got 23 bills coming out. Now I haven't seen them, and they all might be great. I might agree with every single one of them, but the reality is, at some point, you have to go, gee whiz, why do we just need to keep adding more laws? But as our society changes, we enter in special forces of liberty, and we find that there are new laws that are coming out where people like you have to find ways to safeguard our freedoms and liberties based on somebody else's agenda for their religion. Did I say that right?
I mean, we definitely have to come up with policies to restore the rule of law, to protect communities, to strengthen families, to definitely not let the left enshrine our government with their religion. I mean, I'd say the left, 90% of the left's culture war agenda stuff is unconstitutional, because it's just their efforts to entangle our government with their religious worldview so they can use the organs of government, the instrumentality of government, to coercively impose their belief system on everyone else.
Or their narratives or their ideologies,
yeah.
and so in just a second, I want you to answer the question, how is it unconstitutional? Oftentimes I ask questions that like a five-year-old, because it's easier to understand it that way. And my listeners, oftentimes I'll have somebody say, hey, I watched that interview, but I didn't understand this. So I always tweak my questions to a very basic level to make it easy to understand. But what I will agree with you on absolutely is that, our Constitution was it was, almost like it followed the KISS method, keep it simple, stupid. The Constitution was very basic. It has some very basic laws. I mean, I know there's a lot in there. However, all this new legislation that keeps getting introduced, like you said, by these religious groups, as we'll call them, they're basically manipulating the Constitution to mean things that it didn't originally mean. Is that what you're saying?
That's part of what I'm saying, for sure. I mean, the left definitely takes the 14th Amendment and twists it in ways it's not supposed to be twisted, and use that as a basis for policies to basically then entangle our government with their religious worldview in a way that's totally unconstitutional.
So how are these things unconstitutional?
So the answer is that it's unconstitutional based on the principles of the separation of church and state, okay, under the First Amendment. So it's unconstitutional for the government to set up a national religion. It's unconstitutional for them to take any action that gives any citizen the impression that the favored religion of the United States is just one worldview. The government can't put religion over non-religion. It's supposed to be neutral. So if a public school flies the gay pride flag, what does that convey to me if I have children going there? It would be my impression that the favored religion of the school is the LGBTQ cult, if you will. Of course, the LGBTQ cult constitutes a religion through way of legal definition, because it's organized, full, it has an ultimate concern, it has a private moral code by which its members can live its daily lives by, and so forth. It's all of their provisions or positions are predicated on a series of unproven faith-based assumptions and naked assertions that are implicitly religious and inseparably linked to the origin of secular humanism. The Supreme Court, in cases like Torcaso versus Watkins and other cases, has found that secular humanism is religion. The Fifth Circuit, where Louisiana is, has found over and over that secular humanism is a religion, and then we have all of these medical experts and theologians and ex-gays or persecuted Christians all coming into court or in places testifying under oath that critical race theory, abortion ethos and practices, and LGBTQ ideology and practices are inseparably linked to that religion. So what does that all mean in English? It means this.
Right, because you're really smart. The way you said it, that was really smart.
Well, that's important stuff to hear because that's the ammo.
I get it. No, I completely understand it.
We don't live in a common sense republic. We live in a constitutional republic. So things have to be based off this constitutional structure. The highest level of authority in the country is the Constitution of the United States. Below that, you have the three branches of government: the federal courts, the executive, the president, and his bureaucracy, and the legislative branch. And anything that they make and decide that then conflicts with the next level, which is the state level, which you have the state constitution, then you have the three branches of government on the state level: the governor, the executive, right, the courts, and the legislative branch. Anything that the federal level, any law they make that conflicts with the state law is preempted under the doctrine of preemption. And so you got to know how to, but anything that the federal government does that conflicts with the states, but the states policies are aligning with the federal constitution, then that beats the federal level. So you got to know how to get around. You got to know how to maneuver all these different things to weaponize the right part of the federal constitution and state constitutions in order to get around different doctrines, to get around either existing federal law, like Jay Morris's bill does with dealing with social media censorship. We've written a bill for Jay Morris, Senator Morris. They would fall within what's called subsection E3 of the Communications Decency Act, which is a state law exemption, which is a complex way of saying we've come up with an idea that will pierce through these defenses that would cause it to get struck down otherwise. You got to know how to do all these things in order to be successful. It's not about having a lot of laws. It's about having laws that are quality, quality, not quantity is what's needed. And the way to do that is to not go and just do something out of emotion. I think you do it the way we do it. I think it's the best way. File the lawsuits, figure out the answer, and then take it to the legislative branch. Problem is that it's complex. And, a lot of these guys want to keep things really simple and do it simply. But if you do it simply, it might lack the teeth. I mean, bills that work, if you leave one sentence out, it could be struck down. If you add one sentence too much, it could be struck down. It is brain surgery. It is threading a needle. And so what we really need is
shall, the mays, the can'ts, the shan'ts, and all that other stuff are really important at that point, right?
Well, all of it's important. All of it's important to know the bases. You got to have a legal basis or a federal law, some kind of controlling Supreme Court authority for the bases for doing different things. I mean, DeSantis takes our bills all the time, plagiarizes them, but only halfway does it. And then he adds stuff to it and it ruins it. And I keep going to him going, and you got to do it just like we're giving it to you. I mean, you've got to get out of the way of your own success. Stop thinking about credit. Stop thinking about ego. If you want to protect your constituents, do it like we're giving it to you. And we're not being that way because we think we know.
Well, you're being that way because you're very confident. I think the way you're presenting things, I don't take it as arrogance. I take it as confidence.
Well, I mean, in terms of actual credit, and if anyone deserves credit, it'd be like judges like Scalia and Alito and Thomas, because we're in court, and those judges that are Christian conservative originalist kind of judges, and they're not trying to impose Christianity either, even though a lot of them come from that worldview, or they favor that worldview, they are identified by it. They will provide the answer as to how the legislative branch can regulate something. So maybe they'll strike something down, but they'll be like, okay, we're going to strike this down because this was a bad law. But if the legislature would do it like this, this, and this, then it would work. So we're going, well, let's take the numbers, and so that's what we do. But then to get them to listen is not easy. But this is something that I can do on your show that I think is helpful. And that is when we're doing what we're doing. Well, the reason I was at CPAC and so forth is because we're here to provide a call to action. What's really helpful is if your listeners would go to specialforcesofliberty.com, scroll down to Louisiana. There's even a map where they can click on.
I don't know if you see it or not. I've been having it scroll across the bottom of the screen.
Oh, nice. Okay, well, perfect.
This whole interview, your website's been going across the screen.
And I don't, this is not a self-serving request. Go to our website because we want you to give something to us. I mean, that's the reason the bills are there for Louisiana. And what the different members of the House and Senate need is they need the people who live there to download the bill language, and either email it to them on Facebook Messenger or regular email and say, I live in the state, I vote here, I want you to pass this bill. And also I want them to try to, they themselves try to understand the bills, because the fact of the matter is that a lot of legislatures know just about as much as they do. And so
well, I'll explain something to you, and I want to ask you about DeSantis, by the way, about his the legislation. I won't even say what they're calling it. You know which one I'm referring to. But was that something that you proposed to him?
There are several bills on the topics that we have that Florida and Texas both, they do this a lot to us. They take it and they go, this is great. This is unbelievable. These guys don't care about donations and credit. Let's just plagiarize it. And we're fine with that. But the problem is they only do it partially. Does it make sense?
Yeah, exactly.
Because we don't have the pressure on them. They kind of feel like it's up to them to solve the problem, right? Because they're elected.
Right.
It doesn't work that way. Once again, if you get appointed to be a brain surgeon, but you've never gone to school to learn how to do that, but you're the brain surgeon, so you have to do it, and you do it on your own, is it gonna be successful? No, you gotta have people guide your hand. And so there, in terms of that bill, we have a bill that's vastly superior called the School Establishment Clause Act, that if they would run that, then it would not be preempted under the decisions in Bostick, Windsor, or Obergefell. And those guys don't even know what I'm talking about when I say that, because they're not litigators. They don't know the landmines that lie in wait for them. Another perfect example was that the Senator Morris bill that he had in Louisiana. He framed it correctly. It was killed in the Judiciary Committee or in one of the committees. I might be saying the wrong committee, in the House side, for some dirty politics reasons. And it should not have died. It should have gone to the governor to be signed into law. The way he ran it was right. But I gave that same bill to Representative Sabatini, who's running for Congress. Good guy, military guy. And then Senator Joe Gruters. And then DeSantis took the bill and then added all this stuff to it. And when he passed his version of the bill in May of 2021, they were sued 5 days later by Net Choice, who I fight in hearings all across the country all the time. The Attorney General's office reached out to us and they go, look, you guys kind of help with this. Would you mind filing some amicus briefs or helping us in any way? And we said, no, because you added to it. And we agree with the plaintiff's arguments that it's now ruined. It is threading a needle on the culture war topics. That's
that's what I'm saying. What I'm picking up from you is some people might take that as arrogance. They might say, well, you just want it done your way or no way. But from listening to you during this interview, I can tell that, you're not saying, hey, look, I don't care about credit. I just care about how, threading the needle, so properly and so meticulously that we can both have a win under our belts. Because if you use my idea and you win, now we've laid the groundwork to work together on other legislation for the benefit of the people of our country.
Well, let me give you an example. I'm gonna pick on a friend of mine. I really, really like Representative Barbara Ehart from Idaho. She's great. She's great, like great values. She was a gym teacher. So as a gym teacher, who's better than her to write the Fairness in Women's Sports Act? She wrote that. She came up with that. It's good. It basically says, the state of Idaho says boys can't participate in girls' sports because the state of Idaho says so. That's basically what it says. Okay. Now she passed it. She introduced it. It was passed into law, and it was immediately struck down in federal court in Idaho. But what did all the other states do? They all copied her version. They're all running it, and their argument is, well, that's the Ninth Circuit. It's liberal, and those courts are liberal. And another circuit, like the Fifth Circuit, which Louisiana is part of, which is the best circuit, by the way, the most honest one. They might uphold it, but the problem is
our circuit. You said,
Fifth is the best.
Which was the Fifth? Is it the Fifth Circuit?
Fifth Circuit's the best one,
right?
I think. Which there's 3 states: Texas, Louisiana, and Mississippi are part of. Now, I like to go fight in those super blue circuits so I can just wreck them. Right. I'm about to file a lawsuit in Vermont, which is going to be unbelievable because it's to kind of help the left see that while they can believe in their dumb worldview, and they can, it is a religion. And if they want to leave it behind, they can as well and join a different one. But they need to know that they're really a cult, and that's kind of what they are. But so again, once again, back to the Fairness in Women's Sports Act. or even all the CRT bills, you got to structure it a certain way or you're going to lose. You're going to lose. Or you can do Mississippi. I like the guys that ran the CRT bill. I've met with them a lot. It has no enforcement mechanism. It's a joke. It really doesn't do anything. The thing is that back to credit and us and arrogance and all this kind of stuff, we want to solve the problems because people are really suffering. Okay, people are really suffering because of the government's endorsement of LGBTQ crap.
Right.
People are really suffering because of the CRT nonsense and the indoctrination and how that does create division and a lot of problems. People are suffering severely because of the social media censorship. I mean, I talked to a pastor today whose entire YouTube channel was completely taken down, and all the money and all the time they had to get over 500,000 subscribers gone in an instant just because they could do it. And there's no, they're helpless, but we have bills that will fix these problems. But we have to cut through all the nonsense and all the egos and all the stuff. And what can help us with that is for more locals to go to the websites, watch any video that's there that explains the things, read them themselves. And then what's really the best is if they print the bills and they go to the state house, and they go up, walk the halls like you can go 2 times a week.
Right.
Members, people go there and they walk the halls and they pass out the bills and they try to they themselves explain it. That really moves heaven and earth. And I wish. Go ahead.
No, you go ahead.
I was going to say, I just wish the stuff we did was more simple. I really do. A lot of the bills will have like a cool title, like the Stop Woke Act, the Social Media Accountable Censorship, the SMAC Act, the Save Our Children Act, SOCA, the School Establishment Clause Act, SECA,
Right.
The Truth in Reporting Act. We have the Cowles Law. That's a bill that just really smacks down fake news media, which you're not part of, but the liberal establishment media. I have a bill right now that just wrecks them. Absolutely will wreck them for being so malicious.
I now understand why you and Michael Lunsford get along so well. He like you guys are like just zoning on policy, and all the language that involves with it. I mean, after talking with him, y'all sound just alike on when it comes into threading that needle in such a way that you're not sowing ego, you're not sowing arrogance, you're just sowing truth and facts and information together in a way that it makes the perfect bill that can get passed to preserve our freedoms and liberties.
Let me say another word to throw into that you just listed.
Yeah.
Authority. We make laws. We propose laws based on authority. Federal Constitution controlling prescriptions, federal Supreme Court decisions, state constitutional bases. We have a reason for every sentence of a bill. Does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
We'll have like a cool title, and then we'll have the legislative findings in the bill. And that's really the roadmap for how the attorney general can defend the bill. That's the talking points for the members as well. That's all the authority. And then below that, we have the bills. But we write our bills in a way that does not leave a lot of room for judicial interpretation, because we know if you give room for the courts to interpret it as they want,
right,
you're going to be in a lot of trouble, because courts are bound to interpret things based off of precedent. So even if it goes to like a Trump appointed guy who's going to be really honest, he might be bound by what's come before him. So you've got to really pin them to the wall by really making everything airtight and citing the reasons for why the laws are required to be structured in that way. So
how many people do you have working in your organization?
So we have volunteers. All of us are volunteers. We do accept donations. That certainly helps us, but I never want to be fixated on that. Okay. I really just want to be focused on getting the result. That's what we really care about. But I have lots of volunteers. And
you gotta survive, though. I mean, you can't just.
Well, we all have other jobs. Everybody on my team has another job, because we've definitely seen these organizations that fight things as a lifestyle and as a living, as an identity. And we've seen that it kind of warps them a little bit. And we don't want to be dependent on credit and donations and that kind of stuff. We don't want to have a banquet where we get a reward. We want to pass laws that will work. That's what we want to do.
Right.
And so I've got lots and lots and lots of volunteers throughout the country. In different states, we might have, like a point person, So I've got Sergeant Major John Gunter Jr. He is my main email guy. He does I'll be like, John, I need you to send out 1,500 emails, individual, not
wow.
over the weekend. and he'll do it. He'll start in the morning like 4 a.m. and he keeps all of our emails straight. He's just the communications guy on the team. And then you'll have like, Christine Wheely will travel the country to push this stuff. I'm traveling the country. Ernest Shell just went on mission with me. Terry Anderson. There's a bunch of us that are going around. I mean, we'll be in Maine one day, and the next day in Missouri, and the next day after that in Rhode Island, and the next day after that Idaho, and the next day after that in New Hampshire. So
wow.
we go where we're supposed to go. But it would, and we're willing to do that. You get me in a hearing to defend anything, I will wipe out whoever the opponent is. Okay, but I got to be able to get there, and the way to get there is we need locals to take the bills to the members of the House and Senate and say, "I live here, I vote here, I want you to run this bill." That kind of thing. So we got to get a sponsor. It's got to be introduced. It's got to be drafted. The committee, it's got to go to committee, and a lot of times, even then, the members have already made up their minds. But why it's so important for people to print the bills and take them around and email is because even if you get someone great like Senator Jay Morris to carry a bill for you, or Bear Alvedine, or Representative Hodges, or any of those folks to do it.
I got to tell you, those names you just now said, they have a team of people that support them and will get behind them on legislation that they like.
Well, it'd be helpful if they worked with them on it. I want them to try to understand what we've put down, the legislative findings. I mean, I could just think of, that we have the authority that will help the bill survive if it's enacted. And that's a key thing. And then you don't need 50 CRT bills. You don't need 50 anti-pornography bills. There's only, back to liberty, there's only 2 or 3 things you can do in each one of these topics. That's why I have a hard time being like, well, we formed an organization and I'm an executive director. I give a rat's rear about any of that. I want them to win, and I want them to stop the problems that we're addressing. And I want them to do it in a certain way. I mean, it can be fun and it's great and that stuff, and it is cool. I just want them to actually get the result. So,
yeah, this is amazing. I've really enjoyed not only getting a chance to meet you. This is one of my favorite parts about what I do is, when I meet people that I really can enjoy, support, what they're working on, and then I bring them on my show and I really get a chance to get to know them. It's not even work. I mean, it's that's why I enjoy it, but also because I created this platform as a way to find things that unite us. Yeah. And while I don't I have friends that listen to my show and watch my show, and sometimes I say, yeah, I don't agree with that because I'll talk about election integrity, and they'll say, oh, well, the last election was not stolen, and you don't, they might believe in the vaccines or whatever the case may be. And I say, it's not about, that's why I don't try to come out heavily against, certain things. I try to find things that unite us more in a way, because when you're always doing negative and you're always, saying this is the way it's got to be, you end up pushing people away, which is kind of what I like about what you're doing here is you're not really, of course, you've got your beliefs, but you're really looking for ways to bring more people together. It looks like
I have my beliefs. I'm definitely a Christian. I believe in that.
Absolutely.
I think there's a lot of freedom and human flourishing in there, and I would recommend anyone to subscribe to that worldview, which I didn't come up with. Okay,
right.
Exactly. When it comes to the bills, my beliefs are completely irrelevant. My job is to figure out what the Constitution requires and what the states can and cannot do, or the federal government, in view of that, or the courts as well. I'm fighting them all, man.
And that's what I've noticed about you. You're at that back to that, threading that needle. Yeah, I'm not seeing that even though ideologically you're against a lot of these things, the LGBT and things like that, and CRT, and I certainly agree with you on that. I don't think it should be taught in our schools, and I don't think that it should be forced on us and the narratives. But what I like about it is that you're not going about it in an ideological way. You're not saying, hey, look, this should not be part of our society because I don't believe in it. You're saying, hey, look, this should not be part of our society because it actually violates the Constitution. It actually distorts our Constitution in such a way that it could lay a precedent that in the future generations that come, they might have something different that we haven't thought of besides CRT or besides LGBTQ, and they use those methods and tactics to further weaken our Constitution. And if we continue to let them do that, then eventually our Constitution has been eroded, and we don't have anything but just a bunch of laws and a land that kind of steer you in different directions, and there's nothing that's cohesive that holds freedom and liberty together.
Yeah. Making the Constitution be supreme is a
Did I say that as smart as you?
You did. The thing about,
I mean, I'm joking a little bit, but there's some truth to that.
there's about 85% right, I would say.
Okay, hey, look, I'll take 85%.
Well, I mean, the problem is, I'll put it like this: it doesn't matter what the Constitution says; it matters how the courts interpret it. So someone might sit down and go, "I'm going to read the Constitution." They read it and they go, "I just read it. I know it now." Nope, because it's how they interpret things. But when they start doing this manipulative interpretation stuff, you can untwist it to get them to interpret it correctly, or you can use their misinterpretation against them, but creates enough pain to where they'll then go back and fix it. Does that make sense?
No, that makes perfect. That's what I guess I'm using that term, thread the needle, a little bit too broadly. That's exactly what you're.
Yeah, we're trying to thread the needle, 100%. We're trying to.
No, but
yeah, go ahead.
No, I start to understand what the objective is. It's not so much to stop it in the Constitution; it's to stop it in the courts before it changes our Constitution, or before it makes a precedent or sets a precedent for other laws to be able to come in, even though they might be running parallel to our Constitution. That can be just as damaging, or if not more damaging, because it can still say, "Hey, we've left the Constitution alone, but these laws over here that are parallel to it, these are the ones to follow instead of the Constitution." And what your process is doing is it kind of not separates it, but it makes it towards not connecting.
We're trying to maximize truth. We're trying to maximize freedom, which gets complex. We're trying to maximize human flourishing with the bills. And in doing that, we're also trying to restore the rule of law. And those are some of the fundamental things that we're doing. Right. And that would mean, like, we want government so we can all live together. We want the government to obey the Establishment Clause, the principles of separation of church and state, and not endorse from religion, including not only the institutionalized religions, Christianity, Judaism, Islam, but the non-institutionalized religions as well. The biggest problem I think we've been having in our country is the left refuses to admit that they are a cult. They're advocating for a cult. LGBTQ, Black Lives Matter, all that stuff it takes a lot of faith to believe that a man can become a woman just because they say they are. Does that make sense? Right. I mean, that's
I understand
a lot of faith to believe that you can be born in the wrong body, And so even BLM, they have the What We Believe section on their websites. They all have these, instead of having the cross or their 10 commandments, they have their own flags and symbols to represent their worldview. And they can have all that, but we want the government to stop getting in bed with them, to remain neutral, because with the government stamp of approval on them, what it does is it inflames their moral superiority complexes and causes them to go socially marginalize and even violently oppress people that disagree with them, that don't believe in their worldview.
No, I get it. Just like the major religions of the world have an ideology, so have some of these other groups adopted their ideologies, which you're just trying to stop them being adopted in even though they're not saying, a government's not saying, hey, we're going to adopt that because it's a religion. The process of it that they are trying to use is similar to that of a religion, and you're just using that First Amendment to be able to stop that and say, hey, that distorts our Constitution.
We're using it to stop the government from entangling itself with that worldview, from favoring that worldview,
right,
from endorsing that worldview over others, from promoting that worldview. We want the government to stay back. Because if a public school permits drag queen story time for children, it conveys to the children that the government's approving this, and this must be the right worldview. Instead of letting them make up their minds, where the government's neutral on that, and on their own they can believe in what they want to believe. We want the government to not weigh in, but to remain neutral on certain things.
So, Christopher, we're gonna wrap up here because we've got I'm at I'm a little past my sweet spot, but I'm right around my sweet spot for a podcast because a podcast like it for be an hour. So, two final questions. I want to give you, would you have any chance to do any final thoughts for wrap up? But I also ask everybody, my favorite question from our podcast, which is, what unites us as Americans? What makes our country great, and what unites us as Americans?
I mean, what unites us as Americans is we have the Constitution. That is our standard and our yardstick. Without that, we have no country. So that's the number one thing that unites us. We live in a constitutional republic that the federal Constitution gives limit. That's the most controlling authority in the country. Right. It gives authority to the federal government, and they're very powerful, but it limits their authority and then gives the most amount of power to the states, but the feds are always trying to take power away from the states. So
using money, federal money.
Well, using leverage and using the different levers of government to do that. And but what unites us is we have a checks and balance system. We have 3 branches of government. We have different levels of government. So it's all of those things taken in the aggregate. And I would say that. Any
final thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, my main thought is a call to action, and that is for your viewers to go to specialforcesliberty.com, to look at the content, to go to if it's Louisiana, go down to Louisiana, read those bills, and if they try to understand them, if they like them, download them and email them and send them to the state house members, the state senators, not the federal level, but the states level, or even print them out and take them to the members and press them to pass the bills. Push those bills.
Love it. Well, Christopher, thank you very much for your time tonight. I'm going to end the broadcast here in just a second, and then I'll talk to you off camera for just a few minutes. But I want to thank everybody so much for listening and taking the time. And remember, this interview will be on a podcast at any podcast app, Spotify, Stitcher, iHeart, iTunes, wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. And most importantly, I'm working really hard to make sure we get really good content for people and our viewers, but also bringing on other organizations that are trying to do the same thing for our country, to improve our country, unite our country, which I think this is a great example that we had tonight. And so it'd mean a lot to me if you shared the podcast and shared the interview. Until the next time, thank you so much for tuning in tonight, and I'll talk to you soon.